It would be like walking up to the betting window and be like, I'm going to place a bet on this team, and you pick the wrong team than you intended. They give you the slip. Your team loses. You go to rip up the slip, and you look that, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, I bet on the other team. Oh, I won.
Fan-fucking-tastic.
Oh, okay, great. Fantastic, right? Like, literally, that's the job of an investor. You just don't know which ones are going to win. So you just basically treat everybody who's in your portfolio amazing. You try to just be as supportive as possible, which is, again, life is pretty simple. Just find the best people you can, invest in them, support the heck out of them. If it doesn't work out and they did a good job, and bet on them again.
Jason Calacanis in the building. How are you?
What? How you doing?
Fantastic.
Thanks for having me on the pod.
You are in the most beautiful studio that I think I've ever seen.
And you're in your bedroom.
I am. That is
with
true.
A lighthouse poster.
With a what?
With a lighthouse poster behind you.
With a lighthouse poster, indeed. That is. But we're all starting somewhere.
With a wave crashing around it.
It's chaos, right? What were we talking about just before we started? There's some chaos going on here.
Chaos. Well, wait. Where is that lighthouse?
I'm not sure.
Does it have some specific meaning?
No, I'm not.
What would Freud say about picking a lighthouse on the edge of human existence that's being pummeled by giant waves? What would that say about a man who puts that as the first thing he sees when he wakes up and the last thing he sees when he goes to bed?
Can you tell that
I'm a bit of a loner?
Can you tell that I'm an only child, Jason?
It does scream, I'm alone at the edge of existence, yes.
Can you tell that I'm...
But maybe you're opting into it. See, that's the thing about lighthouse operators. They're opting into it. Nobody's forcing them. It's not a jail. So there's a certain type of person who wants that solitude.
Jason,
who wants that gig.
Incredibly perceptive, my friend.
There you go. All right. Well, welcome to This Week in Freud. Okay, go ahead. For sure, man. Don't let me take it over in the first 30 seconds.
That's fine. So here's a question for you. Podcasting as a host, which you are, do you find it odd being on the other side of the mic sometimes? You slip into host mode?
I do slip into host mode sometimes, and I do start thinking like, no, this is the question you should ask. And if you want me to answer that question, you asked me 4 questions. Just the second one is the winner. That's what the audience actually wants to hear. Or why didn't you ask me this follow-up question? Yes, that does go through my mind sometimes. It happens. It makes it very hard for me to listen to other podcasts because it becomes so obvious to me when the person who's conducting the interview doesn't know what they're doing. And then it really makes it amazing when you listen to, Howard Stern interviewing Hillary Clinton, or Joe Rogan interviewing Sam Harris, or Sam Harris interviewing anybody. You start to realize, wow, some people are really great at this, right? And they all have different styles. And stylistically, many different styles work. In some cases, it's very difficult for me when I know more than the subject. That was the thing I had to unlock as an interviewer. Sometimes I have somebody who's a guest and they know less about the topic we're talking about than I do. That doesn't often happen, but let's say it's angel investing or media or something where I've spent, a decade or 2 doing it, and they're a young founder. They're actually deferring to me, and sometimes they might say, well, what do you think? And that's problematic. In fact, Evan Williams, who is very good at media, but I think, he's more successful than I am, having done Twitter and Medium and Blogger, but I created better editorial brands than him, certainly with Engadget and This Week in Startups, like singular editorial properties. So we have like long conversations. And when I interviewed him, every time I'd ask him a question, he'd say, well, what do you think? You did these other publications, you did Silicon Valley Reporter. What do you think? I'm like, well, you're on stage in front of 2,000 people right now. I'm the interviewer. So sometimes with people who are my friends or whatever, I'll just say, hey, listen, I might ask you a basic question that I know the answer to, or that you might be interested in my answer, but just humor me for the sake of the audience. And sometimes even in an interview, I'll say, hey, for the sake of the audience, can you explain what this is? And I added that to my repertoire because every time I'd say, what's CPM? Explain CPM. They'd be like, you don't know what CPM is and you've been in the advertising business all the time? I was like, no, I know the audience. So then I have this way of coaching it and framing the question. Explain to the audience or explain to somebody who doesn't know what CPM means. Cost per 1,000, right? Anyway, you learn. I think somewhere after 200 or 300 of these like interviews, you'll get good at it. The problem is most people in life. No, I mean it's not a joke either. I mean I think a lot of people in life think like, well, I've done 10 podcast episodes. Like, here we go. Where's my, why are the ads not sold? And it's like you might want to get to year 3 or 4. You might want to get 100, 200, 300 reps under your belt. Everybody thinks like they go to the. They shoot 100 3-pointers and that they're Steph Curry. It's not exactly how it works. Maybe if you shoot like, 1,000 a day for 100 days, you might start to understand what shooting involves. Somewhere around the 100,000.
What makes a good podcaster then?
The best podcasters, in my estimation, are people who can't work for anybody else and who don't want to work for anybody else and who are fearless. And they have some level of respect from their audience. So if you look at Joe Rogan, if you look at Ben Shapiro, if you look at Bret Easton Ellis, if you look at the Red Scare, Dasha and Anna, if you look at Sam Harris, Leo Laporte, any of those folks, they are not working for anybody but themselves. You cannot aggregate them into a podcast company. God knows people have tried, Bill Simmons as well. They are singular voices who don't answer to anybody and so authentically connected with their audience that you know they're going to say what they believe no matter what. And I think this goes to, the influence Howard Stern had on the format of radio. Howard Stern was somebody considered a shock jock in the 80s and 90s in New York City and eventually went across the country here in America. And he would do shocking stuff, He would have strippers on the podcast. He would have, a Ku Klux Klan member on the podcast. He was very outrageous. But then he kind of evolved and you started realizing, wow, he's so authentic and his interview style is so incredible that he gets people to share things that nobody else does. And they feel comfortable doing that. And that had, I think, a deep impact on me. Not the strippers and the Ku Klux Klan members, but the latter, which is he's authentic, right? You know what he's saying is real. I think Charlie Rose also had that when he was on air. You knew he was like actually reading the books or cared about the topics. He was an intellectual, a public intellectual who wanted to have these like really incredible discussions. Morley Safer, Oprah Winfrey. There's a cohort of people who just got really good at interviewing people. And you can see that in podcasting. The reason podcasting is getting so popular right now is because the press and journalism and media is so broken. And that's leading to people wanting to, if you're a subject who was in the press a lot, like Sam Harris was in the press a lot, or Joe Rogan might be, or Leo Laporte might be, or Bill Simmons, they were essentially throttled or mediated through the press. And when they got on a podcast as the host, now there's nobody editing them. Then you have their guests on, and then the guests are like, wait a second. You're going to give me 3 hours to explain my point, 2 hours, an hour, and I'm going to get misquoted by a journalist. And this is why journalism is really struggling right now is the people who know the most are going direct to the audience. And journalists, by definition, only know 5, 10, 20% of the story. That's why they have to do research. That's why they have to hit the pavement. But because they don't control distribution anymore, and they only have 10 or 20% knowledge of the situation, they can't compete with the people who are on the inside. They can't compete with people like me who, invest in these companies. They don't have the knowledge base I have. A journalist can't. They're not doing it every day, right? And I was a journalist. I was a founder, and now I'm an investor, and I'm still, quasi-journalist doing my podcast. So it's a really fascinating time. And I think podcasting is a reaction to link baiting, SEO-driven content farming, and just the collapse of newspapers and magazines and those editorial formats, websites, where people don't do fact-checking and they write link-baiting stories. People are tired of that nonsense, and they want to go to the depth of a podcast where people feel that they're not going to be misquoted because I just gave you a 6-minute answer to your question, as opposed to you gave me 2 lines in your story and just pick the ones that you think are the, most interesting or, most likely to get retweeted.
The thing as well is that the ability to have time to play with ideas, right? To sandbox with ideas, to be subtle and nuanced and say something which isn't even quite formed. Whereas if you were to do an interview with a reporter and you play around with an idea which isn't quite formed and then that gets transcribed, that's precisely the loophole that they were looking for, right?
I think so. I think that's exactly right.
Cool. So I want to ask, everybody that's listening will have heard Silicon Valley, angel investing. But for me, as someone who likes to think that he is curious intellectually and learns about the world and does this podcast, and we're on this will be around about episode 150. So I might be about halfway to your bar of having an idea about what I'm doing.
You think you'll get a proper microphone by episode 200?
So right here,
150 and using AirPods. What the heck's going on here?
Right here, that is
all right. There, that's my boy. That's
SM7B.
my boy.
Sure. I'm not fucking about, Jason.
All right. Well, you come on the podcast and you're in your bedroom and you got AirPods on, or you not even have AirPods on. You got cabled headphones on, but you do have the Shure SMB7. Is that right? SMB or SM7? That's the best microphone, by the way.
SM7B, we're doing it. Cloud Lifter, Audient ID 14. We've got it. The setup is here. Don't let it fool you. But yeah, so Silicon Valley.
Is your mom going to come in with fish sticks? She coming in with fish sticks any minute now?
That's actually, well, because we're running about 15 minutes late, I've had to text her and let her know that she needs to push those back a tiny little bit.
Push the fish sticks back a little bit?
Yeah. Just
little bangers and mash coming? What do you got?
Nice.
What's on the menu?
That's some classic
Mushy
British
peas?
food for you there.
Any mushy peas there? Some chips?
Tea.
I like that fish and chips and the mushy
Yorkshire
peas.
tea.
Oh, I love a little tea. I'm having a little tea right now.
Hey, I like it. Did you walk in with kombucha as well?
No, I don't fuck with kombucha. I'm an adult. I'm a capitalist. We don't fuck with kombucha. Yeah, man, I'm not paying you $8 for some like fermented, like whatever. Come on.
Something that someone else has already digested.
Yeah, I'm not fucking with kombucha. Sorry.
Got you. Right. So
that's quotable. I think that's quotable. Somebody put that on the Reddit sub. Jake House not fucking with kombucha.
Right.
You should get a Reddit sub of
Silicon Valley, right? Angel investing. It's words that get thrown around a lot. I want to come to Floyd Mayweather, angel investing, Silicon Valley, and I want to learn how to throw a jab. I want to understand the structure of the industry. I don't know what seed extension is. I don't know what Series A or Series B or any of this bullshit. I want to know how the industry works. Can you tell us how the industry works, Jason?
Yes, I can. So there are companies being started all the time, right? There are mom and pop companies. There are pizzerias. There are movies and CDs created. And this is all entrepreneurship going on in the world, right? Somebody might start a design agency. Somebody might start a PR agency, dry cleaner. You get the idea. And these are all great businesses. They can employ people. Sometimes the owner can make a nice salary and be independent. Sometimes they can make even more than that. They can make a life for themselves, right? So that's all fine and well. What we do in Silicon Valley and in the venture capital industry is we look for the outlier companies that can grow at a velocity that would be considered unrealistic, inhuman, bizarre to other people. And the best analogy I heard on this is that, venture capital is like jet fuel. It's for or rocket fuel. You wouldn't put rocket fuel like on a Vespa. Would not work out well. Like you're not trying to go Mach whatever, on those vehicles. So those vehicles are fine. They don't need a lot of money to start them. You can start a consulting firm for $0 today. You can just literally put up a free website and you can email 1,000 people and say, here's what I do, and get 3 customers. The businesses we invest in, if you were to look at one like Uber or Robinhood or Calm.com, these are businesses that were intended to impact hundreds of millions of people, 1 billion people, large numbers of people. And, that is a different type of business, and it requires a different type of capital and a different type of plan. Most of those businesses fail, and when they do fail, they fail hard. So you have to also have a different expectation. If you're starting a consulting firm, you're really not going to fail. There's nothing really at stake, right? Like, what if we set up a website today and say we're going to do a podcast consulting company? C&J podcast consulting, and we're going to teach people how to do podcasts. Like, okay, if we get one customer a year or 10 or 100, like, okay, I guess it's a success. It's more than zero. Whereas with a startup like Uber or Calm, you're building something that is more complex and has a smaller chance of success. But if it does succeed, oh my Lord, it could change the fabric of society and humanity forever. And many companies have, like Google, Facebook, Uber, Airbnb. These things are changing society. And in order to do that, it's sort of an Olympic caliber sport. So that is the difference right now. That's the main difference in the type of companies we invest in. And so that's where most of the confusion comes in. People want to start a company that makes, ginger beer or tea, or they're doing a company that has a noble purpose. And it's like, these do not qualify for the 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 chance of an outlier. Therefore, you're not fundable by this industry. And that turns people off sometimes to the industry and they don't understand it. Or if I told you you're going to start 10 businesses, 6 are going to zero, the 7th and 8th will return half the amount of money you put into them. The 9th will return 2 or 3 times what you put into it. And maybe if you get lucky, the 10th or the 20th or the 30th might return more than 30x. You put in $1, you get more than 30x. So it's a type of gambling and risk-taking that is very unique, very confusing from the outside. And even from the inside, the people who do this kind of gambling struggle with their own psychology and their own existence. So it's no doubt that it's confounding to everybody.
Yes. To begin with, are tech stocks where the money goes due to scalability? Is it just the fact that that has the ability to really rocket off?
Yeah. So, if you look at public stocks, if you invested in Google, Netflix, or Amazon, at their IPO or anytime after the first 5 years of those companies, you'd be pretty happy today, I think. Facebook as well. And so the companies are getting much larger today than they ever have. And I think they've become very resilient because they've been adding multiple business lines in a way that previous companies didn't. So it used to be companies were one-trick ponies. They went public in year 6, 7. Now you have companies staying private and going public in year 10, 11, 12, 13. And they're much larger businesses. They're much stronger businesses. And then once they get public, they get more ambitious. They start doing acquisitions and they become super resilient. So the resiliency of a company like Facebook having bought WhatsApp, Oculus, and Instagram, 3 huge bets, or Google having bought Android, YouTube, much stronger businesses. And then even in the classic businesses like Disney, having bought Pixar, Marvel, and Star Wars, those companies now make them so much stronger that they're not reliant on just the Disney IP, Snow White and Mickey Mouse, which, those things could fall out of favor, but now they get this new life because they have all the Marvel characters, all the Pixar characters, and all the Star Wars characters and all those worlds to just keep building and building and building. So I think buying those kind of stocks, and I'm not a public stock picker, it feels like there's very little downside because the idea that Amazon or Google would go away anytime soon, or perhaps even in our lifetime, does not seem realistic. We did see Yahoo go out of business. So previously, when they were one-trick ponies like Yahoo was, or other companies, it might be possible, like, buying eBay or something. That's been a pretty resilient business, but, they've got one business, really, and, that does make it difficult.
I get it. So
or more challenging.
Let's go back to the.
But we're investing in private companies. Yeah.
Let's go back to private. Where do you find these people? Are you walking down the street? You see some guy who's got a T-shirt on and says, "I own a startup." Like, what happens?
So the way I meet people is, I have a podcast, and amongst founders, I would be, a celebrity on the scale of Lady Gaga. Or Michael Jordan, and then amongst everybody else in the world,
Lady Gaga.
Absolutely, I'm wearing a new dress right now. For those of you listening, it's getting a little uncomfortable in the second half of the hour. But outside of the industry, I'm a nobody, right? So when I lived in LA and I would go to industry parties, nobody would know who I was, and then when I'm in an industry party I might get asked to take 10 selfies in the tech business. And it really is a popularity contest amongst investors. Investors have brands, and people want to be affiliated with different brands. So you might make an analogy of like Creative Artist Agency or Endeavor and the different agencies, William Morris Agency, whatever, in Hollywood. You get affiliated with an agency, or you got affiliated as a musician with a record label. You then become validated. You become anointed in a way, and it gives other people permission to engage with your startup, or in the case of CAA and agencies or labels, music, tours, whatever. Movies. So a lot of what we do here is we anoint people and we fund them, and then we tell them where the landmines are, and we say, let us know if you make it to the other side and how we can help. And it really is basically like you're sending these founders into a war zone, and you see who makes it to the other side. We see who the good news is it's not fatal, and so if you fail, and 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 startups fail, depending on, how you measure it, might be even greater based on, the number of experiments being run today by founders. You need only start 3, 4, 5 companies to have a likelihood of success, right? So that's what I tell people when their first company fails, is that Travis's third company was Uber. Elon's third and fourth companies were SpaceX and Tesla, right? So a lot of times people do their best work on that third time up at bat, fourth time up at bat. That actually seems to be a sweet spot, right? You're not like as nervous. Some people, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, they hit the home run right out of the park. That's not common. It's memorable, so there's a survivorship bias to it. The fact that those companies have become big, or confirmation bias rather, not survivorship. Well, maybe it's both.
It's uncommon amongst uncommon situations, right?
Yeah. It is very uncommon for somebody in their first company to hit a giant outlier success. But because when it does happen, it's so memorable that it feels more common than it is, which I believe is the definition of confirmation bias or survivorship bias. Right? So survivorship bias is like, okay, well, these people survived, therefore there was something the fact that they survived, you read something into who will survive the next time, right? The problem with that was the way they figured out survivorship bias was they looked at planes in World War II that had actually where the bullet holes were when they landed. And they found the bullet holes, were in all these different places, and they were like, okay, well, this is what we need to fix or whatever. And what they didn't realize is those are the planes that made it back, got hit in the wing and didn't get hit in the cockpit or the engine. So it turns out that they weren't including in the sample where the bullets were on the planes that went down because they couldn't recover those planes because they blew up in the sky and crashed. Those ones got hit in the cockpit and the pilot got killed, or they got hit in the engine and the gas tank exploded, right? So you get this weird, bias that is, not, and that's one of the reasons why people who are in the VC industry are constantly trying to figure out the cognitive frameworks and biases, and there's podcasts just about these things, and there's people studying just these things, so that we as people placing the bets can try to figure out a model to unlock this, like it's the fountain of youth or something, right? And that's a major problem for people, is that the randomness that occurs here fools people, right? And then they start thinking, oh, well, I hit Uber, therefore I'm a great picker. And that's just not the case, right? Like, I don't think I'm a great picker. I think I have a great network and I have great relationships.
Sounds like there's a lot of chaos going on.
Yeah, I mean, one way to think about this job of venture capitalist or just investor in startups is 99% of my time is spent on the failed companies. So let me just say that again. If you invest in, 100 companies over your career and you look back on the time you spent, in all likelihood, you're going to have spent something in the range of 90% on the companies that failed. The companies that succeed, you go to the board meetings, they turn over the results and you go, well, that's more than we expected. And you're like,
everyone pats everyone else on the back. High fives.
It's a bunch of high fives. Yeah. I mean, and I've had this in a number of times in my career where it's going up and to the right. And the last thing I want to do is go, hey, let's spend some time together screwing up your formula, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
just you keep working. Doing you. You keep on pushing whatever button you're pushing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you could study it to figure out if you can accelerate it. You can study it to figure out if there are margin issues, competitive issues. There's a lot to do, even on the successful companies. Like, when your company's scaling, you need to hire a lot of people. You need to watch out for competitors. You need to build infrastructure. You need to have things in place that keep this very fast-moving rocket ship from blowing up as it, gets to orbit. It's the ones that never even, get the rockets to the launch pad, that I spend a lot of time on. It's like, okay, is the rocket finished? Great. Okay, are we going to fire the rocket? Oh, there's no jet fuel in the rocket? Okay, great. Okay. Oh, you don't have any astronauts either? Okay. Yeah, it's going to be kind of hard to get to space without those two things. We're going to need some jet fuel. We're going to need some astronauts. Like, we're going to have to finish the rocket. Like, oh, the rocket's not done? Oh, okay. We got to finish the rocket if we got any chance to getting to orbit. So it's a chaotic job. Like, the last week, just to give you a picture of my life with over 200 investments, the last week I've spent dealing with chaos at 4 companies. So 2% of the companies just completely chaotic. And with these startups, they're almost inevitably running out of money, facing existential threats externally, where Google's going to make their product free, let's say, or they're getting really well-funded competitors who then decide they're going to give away $100 bills for $50 and take all the customers. Which is what Lyft did with Uber and Uber did with other people. Like, they get into these crazy, wars of discounting, and, it's pretty scary. So, yeah, I deal with a lot of chaos.
So how much, to step in there, sorry, Jason, how much of
that's
that
why I
is
like
you
your
coming
poster
in
so much.
and massaging people and just saying, let's everyone chill out, let's bring a little bit of order to this chaos?
Yeah, no, a big part of my job. That's why I liked your lighthouse poster so much, is like, when you look at that lighthouse, it's like, yeah, there's a giant wave, it's nature. You don't get the sense that lighthouse is going to get knocked over, right? And that's really my job. It's the job of the founder of any leader is to convince everybody that there's a plan and that we can succeed if we follow the plan and we stick together and we execute at the highest level possible. Our chances, if we work together, are greater than if we don't have a plan and we don't work together. And so a lot of what I will be talking to a founder about is, okay, what does success look like? What's the plan to get to success? Who do we need to be on the team to get to success? Okay, what are the other tactical issues going on? Oh, we're being sued by this person. Oh, we have to get out of this lease. Or, oh my God, we've got these competitors. Okay, great. But let's focus on what's the goal, what's the plan, and who do we need to execute the plan to achieve the goal. And it's very hard to stay focused. When there's bombs going on all over the place, it's very hard. And, I spent some time working on an ambulance, and I was always taken by the people who were in charge. My brother's a firefighter and lieutenant. And, when you watch those leaders in really chaotic situations, they just come in with this surgical precision and this level of calm where they're running into burning buildings. Or, my first call on an ambulance was the night before Thanksgiving in maybe the late 80s, early 90s. And somebody had been stabbed right above their heart. And it was like, oh, this person could die. This is a coin toss situation. And just watching the calm at which people were able to triage these situations is always very impressive to me. And I always think about samurai or Jedi in that regard, which is why there's a poster of Toshiro Mifune in the office. And, if you look at samurais or Jedi Knights who were modeled off of samurai, I think it's a very good metaphor for leadership, which is like, these are very powerful people who don't often take out the sword. They're going to figure out solutions. They're very focused, and they know how to block out what is not essential, right? So there's a great scene where Qui-Gon Jinn is fighting Darth Maul, and this wall gets like a laser wall gets blocking the two of them, and Darth Maul is like pacing back and forth like a cheetah, like in a cage. And Qui-Gon Jinn just kneels down, turns off the lightsaber, and meditates and closes his eyes. And really, that's like, I'm going to conserve my energy here and think about what the right decision is, because those doors are going to open, and it's going to be chaos. And if you look at a scene like the movie Gladiator, there's a scene where Maximus says, listen, whatever, anybody here in the Army, great. Come next to me. We're going to fight together. Whatever comes through those doors, we have a better chance of succeeding if we fight together as one. And he gives this big as one speech. You can look it up. Or there's another great scene in a movie called Black Hawk Down where the snipers say, listen, we got to go in and protect the pilots of that other Black Hawk. Drop us in. And they said, listen, we don't know when we're going to have reinforcements. So if we're dropping you in, I need you to confirm with me that that's what you want and that you recognize that we don't know when we can get your reinforcements or if we can ever get reinforcements there, and we're dropping you into this hostile territory where it's going to be the 2 snipers versus thousands of Somalians who are armed and are surrounding the helicopter. And, I use those metaphors because in each of those cases, people are working together and they're blocking out things that are not important and they're focused on what is important. And that really is what entrepreneurship and leadership is about, that ability to focus in, slow down, take that breath, and say, okay, this is a dangerous situation. This is a critically dangerous situation. This is they're going to drop us into this, situation in Somalia, and we're not going to get out in all likelihood, but we're going to take that chance anyway, and we're just going to focus and let our training and our plan execute itself, whatever happens. Now, those are all violent, crazy situations, but those are the metaphors I choose. I'm sure somebody else could come up with a much more peaceful one, but God, in my experience, it's a fucking war.
I like yours. I like your ones.
Running these companies is a fucking war. It really is. And that's just the successful ones. The ones that are not successful, it's a war and chaos and
whilst fighting the coronavirus.
While fighting the coronavirus. Yeah, exactly. Like those are things that are outside of your control. Imagine you're in the hardware business right now, which is hard enough. You're building a hardware startup and you've got shipments coming from China, or you're supposed to have your hardware solution, that clients paid for. And now it's, lost in customs or something. There's a business disruption for Apple with hundreds of billions of dollars in the bank. No problem. Business disruption with somebody with 6 or 12 months of runway in the bank, big problem.
How much of what you've alluded to there, which is your ability to work out the controllables and the uncontrollables, bring a little bit of order to this chaos, how much of that is learned and how much of that is your constitution? And if it's learned and what elements are, would you be able to talk about a routine or any of the things that you do which tend to help you with that regard?
Well, I would say, some folks are the product of their environments, and that's their primary driver. And then other folks are very good at adding skills. I think you could probably do both. Tim Ferriss, the seeker, as I call him, he seeks out knowledge and he learns it and he advances and learns very quickly. That's kind of his thing. He just adapts and learns new skills very quickly. So it clearly can be done. But there is at its core, I do think, some situations that are high pressure that people grow up in that do define them. And so one theory I heard, I don't know if this is correct or has any basis, but it certainly is an interesting one to consider, is that a lot of the great founders who are good in operating in chaos and under stress had a situation where one parent loved them very much and one parent maybe wasn't as available or was actively cruel or mean. And that person then had to balance and learn to solve this problem every day of their life in their childhood, right?
That's interesting.
2 parents, one who loved them and one who was chaotic or something, and they had to just make sense and navigate that. It does ring true to me. I mean, obviously, we see over and over again, immigrants really overperform an index, in terms of the percentage of them leading very large companies and their leadership ability. Something about immigrant parents and, the work ethic that maybe people see in their parents when they work 3 jobs and they put in 60, 78 hours a week and they force their kids to study because they say, I don't want you to have to work 90 hours a week. There's something positive about that, which is, why it's a little bit heartbreaking that we have this nationalism where we don't want to let in the people who are taking the greatest risk in the world, leaving one country to come to another to try to make a better life. It's like those people are, under such incredible duress, just doing that they become exceptional citizens, I think, by and large, and become incredible for those countries that get to receive that gift, right? Like if you look now in Silicon Valley, the number of Indian Americans who are leading companies out here is just extraordinary. And we had just a massive influx of Indians who suffered greatly, in their journey here and to build a new life here, faced racism, faced, having to work menial jobs to build stuff up, and an incredible work ethic and incredible focus on education. And now Microsoft, Google, I mean, the number of Indian Americans running companies is just stunning and amazing. And now we want to not let them in to the country. It's bonkers, right? I mean, it's very sad for England. It's very sad for America.
How about for you? How about you? Talk to me about your constitution. Talk to me about what it is that you're part of your practice as well. Talk to me about what sets you apart.
Well, I definitely fall into the category of the archetype of like growing up in a difficult situation, Brooklyn in the 70s and 80s. My dad losing his bar when I was 17 years old, and just growing up in a bar and just seeing chaos all the time. I think, and then practicing martial arts for many years and running marathons, I think I just got a level of discipline and fortitude that, I think some people, maybe they have a reaction the other way. They become, they give up or whatever. I, for whatever reason, just grew up a fighter. And I still have that fighter mentality. I'm super aware that the analogies I use, are these war and violent ones. Or nonviolence in the case of the Jedi and Samurai, just violence as a last resort. So, I am incredibly hardworking and dedicated and loyal, and maybe, to a fault, at times, just not letting things go, right? So I have a hard time letting things go, companies failing, businesses failing, projects failing. I just have a never say die attitude, which is probably long-term not a great idea for returns. Being able to cut your losses and give up and move on and use that space to do another project is likely the better scenario as an investor and as an individual. But I just don't like giving up. I like to fight until the last, arrow, the last bullet,
You think you work on that moving forward? You think you'll maybe try and develop that a little bit moving forward, or is it something that you're glad is a curse that you have to suffer for the strengths that it gives you?
Yeah, I kind of like it. I'll be honest. I kind of like it. I like being against the odds. I like the fear. I sleep better at night knowing I fought till the end. And
Closes that loop,
I feel like that's my job. Yeah, I mean, when I'm with the founder, I always tell the founder, what do you want to do? You want to keep fighting, or do you want to, close this chapter of your life and move on to the next one? We will be here either way. If you want to keep fighting, I'll fight with you. If you want to shut the company down or sell it for parts to Google or Facebook and spend 2 or 3 years there licking your wounds and resting, investing, and collecting a giant salary on the roof of Hooli while drinking cocktails and whatever, fine, let's do it. And then we'll come back in 2 or 3 years and kick ass again. And so I kind of leave it up to the founder. That's the balance I found. My natural inclination is to fight, and never give up. Because I've seen so many times that, month 18 or month 30, a founder figures something out and the company goes supernova. And sometimes the idea is just not a great idea. And so or the market conditions are just horrible, and you're just fighting against something that you cannot beat. Like if you're fighting against a tsunami, like you can't swim your way out of a tsunami in all likelihood, right? You probably want to retreat. So there's a time for retreating. It's just not in my nature, generally.
I get it.
And I think it's actually a limiting factor at times for me. I probably should cut my losses on a lot of things and just say, yeah, it doesn't look like this business is going to work out. I wish you luck with it, and we have to focus on the winners. I just have a very hard time doing that. I know VCs who do it really well, and I'm just amazed that they can just be like, yeah, that didn't work. We've committed as much capital as we want. We're going to get off the board, and we wish you luck. Let us know if there's any way we can help. And I'm like, wow, okay.
Super rational approach.
Just it's a much more efficient approach, I think. And I see VCs do it all the time. They're just like, yeah, it's not a fit for us, you know. We're not going to keep going, but you know, we'll give up our board seat, and yeah, if you want to buy us out for 10 cents on the dollar, whatever, you know, it's your company, you do what you want. But they kind of walk away from it.
Yeah, it must be challenging. I would find it challenging to not become emotionally invested, you know, to not have that part of me that wants more than what the figures say, that has faith beyond what the balance sheet shows me, beyond what the stats are. I don't know. I don't know whether that's personifying. I don't know whether that's trying to personify businesses almost as beings, you know, with personalities and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, in order for another door to open, sometimes you got to close one, and sometimes you got to reinvent yourself. So it's, you know, I used to be a journalist, and, you know, I think I took that as far as I wanted to take it. I still dabble by doing this podcast, et cetera, but it's not exactly, I don't do it for journalistic reasons exactly. And so sometimes you got to close the door on one chapter of your life in order to focus your energy on another. It's pretty much that simple. And for founders especially, because you can't do 3 or 4 companies at once or 2 or 3 projects at once. It never really results in an outlier success, right? People look at what I'm doing, they're like, oh my God, you're doing so many things. And it's like, yeah, just if you actually looked at what we're doing, it's all very strategic. It looks like there's a lot of activity, but it's really just 2 types of activity. One is providing a bunch of information to founders that help them, and 2 is investing in them. That's really everything we do falls into those 2 buckets.
So it looks from the outsider looking in like you're potentially spinning an awful lot of different plates, whereas it's been streamlined into 2 very discrete areas, which allows you to then scale the volume that you're doing that at.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we have one thing like podcasts and events and books, right? So like, oh, you wrote a book. Oh, you're doing a podcast. Oh, you're doing a lot of podcast episodes. Oh, you did a second podcast, Angel. Oh, and you're doing the Launch Festival and Scale and Founder University and Angel University and Angel Summit. It's like, yeah, those are all one thing. That's just a way to meet people in the industry and let them, you know, share knowledge with each other. And we, as the hosts of the sharing of that knowledge, hopefully people remember our names so we can do number 2, invest in their companies. That's it. It's literally 2 things. But, you know, if you looked at our Asana project board or our Notion or, you know, our customer support line, whatever, like you would see a lot of different activity, but they all kind of fall into those 2 buckets. So it's sort of like, wow, Disney does a lot of things. It's like, yeah, they do Star Wars and they do Marvel, and Marvel does Avengers, plus Marvel does, you know, these other brands or whatever they do. You know, people outside the Avengers, they're doing Spider-Man and, you know, the X-Men as well, right? But then you look at all of it, it's like, yeah, they entertain people. Okay, do they do anything else? Well, they do the parks, but that's entertaining people. They do movies, that's entertaining people. They do a streaming service, they entertain people. Okay, so they entertain people? What else do they do? They let you buy stuff that they entertained you with. Oh, okay, so I can buy like a Star Wars figure? Yep, you can buy a Star Wars lightsaber. You can make one yourself. You can buy a Marvel t-shirt. You can buy a Marvel lunchbox. Okay, so their business is entertaining you and then selling you merchandise that was burned into your brain because you watched and you were entertained by it. Got it.
It was burned so deeply that you forgot that they were doing it, forgot that they were doing something different.
I mean, what other business do they have? You know, you look at it and say the theme parks are different, or there's all these different themes in the theme park, right? They did Star Wars Land, they do whatever land, this land, that land, Pixar, Cars Land, whatever. You know, they have Epcot Center, Disney World, Disneyland, whatever. It's all the same thing. They're entertaining you. You pay the money, they entertain you. And maybe you buy something on the way out. That's it. Is there any other business Disney is involved in?
Is there something sort of symbolic or structural that people should be looking to apply for that, which is where you have a particular skill set within your life? How can I then scale that skill set so that it then dips into other areas? I'm allowed to then iterate on that particular ability.
It's good to understand what you're good at. That's for sure. I like to tell people what their superpower is as I perceive it. And I ask them, like, do you think your superpower is this? And, different superpowers could work for different things. Some people are engineers, like Elon's an engineer at his heart. Like he's really a physicist and engineer who knows how to build stuff. And if you look at what he's building, like he's really good at metal. Like a lot of what he does is like building parts and metal and shaping it so that it can go to space, or that electric car can be lighter and go further range. And a lot of the shit he learned at SpaceX went to Tesla, and Tesla to SpaceX. Like material science and engineering is what he does. Mm-hmm. And people will think like, oh, there's a lot more going on here. It's like, is there? Right? Like he's an engineer, and he's a great engineer. And people, look at him more like Steve Jobs or whatever. Steve Jobs wasn't an engineer, right? I think Steve Jobs was a marketer, right? He knew, like a packager. Like he really understood how to package and market something to people, simplify it maybe. Like maybe at his core, Steve Jobs was like just a great designer of products, right? And, a brand builder, right? Like he built a brand and packaged stuff. He's really a packager. Now that I think about it, like he made this package, Apple. It meant something. It evoked something. It was simple, clean, opening the box.
Beyond the tech.
Going into the store, using it. All the experience is, so it's kind of like an experience designer. At his core, he's an experience designer. Actually, that'd probably be the best way to say it. He's an experience designer.
I'd agree.
Because the store is an experience thing, using your phone, using your laptop, opening up your phone, taking it out of the box. It's all an experience. And so, you need to know what you're good at. Right? I'm a talker. Like my skill set is talking. That's my superpower, is talking. And so I do a podcast. And then I talk to founders. And I run an accelerator where you talk a lot about people's hopes and dreams and strategies to succeed. So talking is a good one.
Precision with your speech is something that I think is a very, very underregarded superpower. It's something that I encourage a lot of the people that are listening to do if they're not having a conversation with a friend for 30 minutes every week, where they're undistracted and they're talking about something that they care about and that they're genuinely engaged in. I find the process of doing a podcast and recording, I find it therapeutic and sharpening and honing in terms of the skill and what it then enables me to do outside of that in a way that I never had before I did this. And I wouldn't.
Do you feel more energy when you finish the podcast than when you started?
Yes.
Right. So you're an extrovert, not an introvert. You come out of a discussion like this with more energy, more inspired than you do going into it. And people who are introverted would come out of this and feel exhausted, and they would need to take a break and read a book or take a nap or be alone. And so that is really the energy of those two different archetypes of humans, introverts versus extroverts. And knowing that, like some people, you interview them and they're just like, this was like exhausting for me, right? Other people, they're like, great, let's do hour 2, let's do hour 3. They just want to keep talking. Mm-hmm. And so, it's very important for you to understand what your skill set is, what your personality is, what you enjoy, and then lean into that. Because the truth is, when you're starting a company, you can always get other people to fill in. So if you're Elon and you're a great engineer, or you're Steve Jobs and you're a great, experience designer, or you're a great talker and, or you're a great sales executive, you can acquire those other skills from other team members. You don't need to have them. So this idea that there's one type of founder, I get asked that all the time. How do you pick the founders? What founders succeed most often? And the founders that succeed most often are the ones who are self-possessed and don't give up. And it doesn't matter if they're introvert, extrovert. It doesn't matter if they're sales, marketing, product, developer, engineer, visionary, talker, leader, manager. All those different archetypes succeed all the time. There is no commonality, I don't think, other than people who are super self-possessed and they're very focused and they don't give up. So if you're going to look for traits, introvert, extrovert, what job they did previously and how well they did that job, it's probably not as important as those other softer skills, which are actually the harder ones, which is, does this person really care about this idea? Are they going to quit? Will they give up? Or are they going to, build a plan, get a team, and pursue the goal? And it really is that simple. What's the goal here? What's the plan? And who's going to execute the plan? And man, I can't tell you the number of times, you'll ask that to a founder and they don't have a plan and they don't have a goal. And I tell everybody our goal here. When they come work at Launch, our investment company, launch.co, you can see our website. It's just a simple website. Anyway, what we do here at Launch is we invest in companies, and our goal is to be the best investors in Silicon Valley, or the best investors in the world, period. We want to be the best investors in the world. So we just work backwards to what does that mean? Well, we think it means supporting founders early. That's the tactic we're using. That's the plan. And the plan is to invest in 80, 90, 100 companies a year, and in 10 years have 1,000 investments, and invest 10 times as much in the winners as we do in the ones that fail and go out of business. That's it. That's the plan. Let's execute on it. Podcast, big part of it. Podcast, we get to put our founders on the podcast This Week in Startups. We get to put investors on the podcast, angelpodcast.com. We get to meet new founders on the podcast. I met the founder of calm.com and invested in the company because he was on the podcast. And it's a tool. It's a tactic. It just happens to be a tool and tactic that is in my wheelhouse as the leader of the company, right? But I make it very clear for people, like, this is why we're here. And you know what? It's a lot of work to work with 100 companies a year, because that means we got to meet thousands, and we have to sort through over 10,000 to meet with a couple thousand. We're going to meet with 2,000 or 3,000 companies this year after having gotten pitched by over 10,000, right? So just start thinking about those numbers. So if we meet 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 companies in order to get down to 100 investments, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
And you're searching
1 in
for that
50 people
potential payoff at the end, right? Which is that asymmetry is exactly why it's there.
And nobody knows. And there's the punchline. Nobody knows what's going to work. So, by the way, we're going to place a large number of bets. We're going to place 100 bets after meeting thousands of people, after sorting through tens of thousands, and we don't actually know.
And it might not work.
Which one of the 100 every year is going to be the breakout. And in fact, if we all bet, if the 12 members of the team each picked 2 companies each, I doubt that we would, even picking 25 of them, I don't think the majority of people would pick the winner. I thought calm.com would be the second best company in my portfolio. I did think Uber was going to be, a very successful company. But I thought $1 billion or $2 billion company, not a $60 billion company. So I was off by 30 to 60x.
quite a bit, yeah.
So even though I knew it was a winner, I didn't know the magnitude of it, And Robinhood, like a stock trading app for millennials, like I invested in that company and didn't think it was going to work. I thought the founders are incredible. I'm not sure their first idea is going to work. I think it'll probably be their second or third, and I was wrong. And delighted to be wrong.
It's the best way to be wrong in history.
Yeah, it's to place a bet and win. It would be like walking up to the betting window and be like, I'm going to place a bet on this team, and you pick the wrong team than you intended. They give you the slip. Your team loses. You go to rip up the slip, and you look that, I made a mistake. Oh, I bet on the other team. Oh, I won.
Fan-fucking-tastic.
Oh, okay, great. Fantastic, right? Like, literally, that's the job of an investor. You just don't know which ones are going to win. So you just basically treat everybody who's in your portfolio amazing. You try to just be as supportive as possible, which is, again, life is pretty simple. Just find the best people you can, invest in them, support the heck out of them. If it doesn't work out and they did a good job, and bet on them again.
Come back, they'll do it again.
Because
I got 2 questions before we...
They'll definitely do another company again. They may fail again, but, like I said, 3 out of 4 fail, then you only need to do 4 to get to a winner in all likelihood.
I get it. I got 2 questions before we finish up, Jason. First one,
Yep.
Going back to podcasting, someone who's been in the space for quite some time, 60 million plus plays. Is that even more now? More than 60 million?
Probably more, but whatever. I mean, we've been doing it for 10 years and over 1,000 episodes. So it's still a boutique podcast. I mean, we're only talking about 200,000 people listening to every episode. It's no Joe Rogan. It's not millions of people listening to everyone. It's, it's a boutique podcast about a very specific niche thing. But that niche thing, we're better than anybody at doing.
So
I think that's what's important.
Been in space for a long time. Where do you see the podcasting space evolving over the coming years? What's next? More of the same?
Well, I think the listenership's going to, double in the next year or so, because I think we're like right at this tipping point where it's starting to hit the public consciousness. And like with this election cycle, the fact that Bernie Sanders was on Joe Rogan, even presidential candidates are, and not just Andrew Yang, right? Like not just like the 10th person in the race, but the top person in the race are going on podcasts, or people who are writing really important books are now looking at the podcast as the better way to sell their book than going to the press. And consumers are realizing reading journalists and publications is fine. And once in a while, there's going to be like a really important story, and that's great. But overall, if you really want to go deep into a subject, there's a podcast for it that's going to be better. And it'd be better to hear from the subject for an hour or two than to read the story where they were quoted once or twice. That's why journalists, the savvy ones, are getting so into podcasting. They're realizing they'll get more out of the same subjects in the same amount of time by recording it and releasing it whole. That's the big unlock. So when I had Dan Rose, formerly of Facebook and Amazon, now at Kotu, he's the only person who's ever worked for Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, and he did an incredible podcast. And, he probably would be very shy if the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, TechCrunch, Recode, or any other person called him, because their guard would be up. And you'd be like, okay, what's the story? Oh, you're doing an anti-Facebook story? Oh, you're doing an anti-Amazon story? Oh, you're doing an anti-Facebook and Amazon story? Oh, you're doing an Jeff Bezos gave away $10 billion to fight global warming, and nobody has ever put up a fraction of that. Oh, but he didn't give away all of his money, so
everyone's
let's criticize him because he only gave away 10% of it. It's like, literally, the guy just gave away the largest gift in the history of giving, except for Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. But I think it might still be the single largest gift ever. Puts him number 3 in philanthropy, I think, or 4.
But it's not enough.
I think it's Gates. And literally yesterday, all the press was criticizing him. And the press is wondering why the top subjects don't trust him or don't want to work with him, or why Trump's rhetoric on fake news is so powerful. The reason why Trump is able to say fake news is not because the news is fake. It's because journalists haven't been doing a great job balancing out and going straight down the middle with objective journalism. Because journalists have picked a side, they gave up objective journalism and they went towards link baiting in order to save their publications, right? Because Fox showed if you pick a side, you win. So the New York Times is like, okay, we'll pick the left, MSNBC on the left, Fox on the right, Wall Street Journal on the right. So everybody's just picking a side and your subscriptions go up. So if you pick a side, your subscriptions go up. Anybody in the middle is toast. If you're going to go straight down the middle, people are just like, oh, okay, well, this doesn't make me emotionally vested in what you're doing. You want to take down Trump? Great. You want to keep Trump in office and you want to troll the libs? Great. I'll give you money for those two things. But I'm not going to give you money for objective journalism right down the middle. And, journalists have responded to that market condition. And, it's the proper decision in terms of keeping the lights on. It's the wrong decision in terms of building trust with subjects. So subjects just don't trust the press anymore. I don't agree with Trump calling the press fake news. I don't think the news is fake. I think they're just have an agenda and they have a point of view and a perspective now, but they're still presenting it as objective, even though it's no longer objective. Like if all these press people are on Twitter dunking on Jeff Bezos for giving away $10 billion, and then they write about Bezos, it doesn't feel objective anymore. It feels like they're all anti-capitalist, there's a group of them that are just super anti-capitalist, super socialist, and it's just depressing. Like I would rather see I get contacted by journalists literally 9 out of 10 times. It's some negative story. And 1 out of 10 times, maybe they're on background and I can't tell if it's negative or not. But it used to be when I got contacted 10 times, a lot of journalists in the tech business would be like, hey, have you seen anything interesting? And I'd say, yeah, I'm doing this company Blockable, or we got this company Uber, or you should check out this company Robinhood. They're really smart folks. And they would write a profile on them and they would talk about what they were doing and why they were doing it. It was super interesting. Like that was really great because you were presenting to the audience new stuff coming. And the only criticism was maybe the tech press is a little too cheerleadery, but
yeah, like those advertorial type sort of things. Yeah,
not even advertorial. I think the tech industry press were fans of technology. That's how it started.
Yeah.
Like if you were writing about tech, you probably loved PCs in the 80s and software in the 90s and the internet in the late 90s into 2000s. You loved gadgets if you're doing a gadget. You just were a fan of the technology and what it could do, and you loved the people in the industry. And then the industry got so big that, it needs to be criticized because there are bad things that have occurred. But we've lost that magic of like, hey, let's discover something new and write about it. Journalists don't do it anymore because nobody clicks on it. Like you don't get clicks on Twitter for saying, Jason invested $100,000 in this new company that's going to try to change housing. Let me tell you about it. Like that's not going to get as much as, Bezos gave away only 10% of his money and he didn't guarantee how he's going to give it away or over what time period or who he's giving it to. And like they'll find every reason to criticize him and how he gives away $10 billion. Instead of saying, wow, amazing. Who would like to give $10 billion next? What an amazing gift. Because America's not spending on, what countries are spending $10 billion fighting global warming? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, this is a great example. We should be having Bezos on TV high-fiving him. And instead they're going to be like, oh, well, you have too many drivers driving around causing pollution, driving, Sprinter vans around, or you're killing the environment with cardboard. It's like, okay, yeah, there's a story about cardboard. And sure, we could write that story, but can we just take a moment to let that sink in that he's decided to put $10 billion of his own money? It's a big number towards, raising awareness for global warming and solving it.
And the crazy thing between those two situations, the first one being you've done a thing or this is something which is happening and Bezos putting up 10 billion, is both of those things are news. Like that is news. It's a definition of news. A thing has happened which is potentially newsworthy. It's just that one of them has been spun a lot harder and been used as this crutch to push what some people would call an agenda. And I think what you've mentioned there about Trump, it's the fact that they say the best lies contain elements of truth, right? And that's why
the devil mixes lies with truth. The devil mixes lies with truth.
There it is.
The Exorcist. William Peter Blatty. It's a really, really great book if you want to read it. Yeah, and Legion, the follow-up. Really good books.
I watched Legion. Is that the one where they're in a like motel type cafe thing and
nursing
then
home?
All hell breaks loose.
Lots of bad things happen. Anyway, the books are better because the books are really about Catholicism and God and pain and suffering. And why would a just God allow suffering and the devil and evil? So it's really through the lens of Catholicism, a priest trying to come to terms with his own faith. And it just has a little bit of like this horrific edge to it. With murder and why does murder and pain and suffering exist in the world? Like there's a scene in it where there's a group of people who have it's a little graphic, but it's a group of people who don't have the ability to feel pain. Like there's something wrong with their nervous system so they don't feel pain. So if you were to put a cigarette out on their leg or if a cigarette fell on their leg and burned them, they wouldn't feel it. And there's just a scene I always remember is very evocative of a little girl who was suffering that disease who wanted to look out the window and she climbed on to a radiator. And the radiator turned on when she was looking out the window and she got burned on her legs and didn't feel it. Why would God allow that to happen, right? And that's actually, why that movie is so powerful is because even though you don't get that from the movie explicitly, it's kind of this undertone where you're trying to figure out like the nature of evil. Why does evil exist in the world, right? It's like one of those core, mysteries of life. Like, why do people do evil things? Like, what is the point of it all? Why do people blow things up? Why is there terrorism? Why are there murderers? Like serial killers, whatever.
In a world that's got a God in it, it's a difficult question to answer. Very difficult.
Well, we got to God. It only took us an hour. So an hour 15.
Final question. Final question, Jason. Yeah. Do you have any cool tech on your radar at the moment?
Cool tech on my radar. I am particularly interested in robotics outside of factories. I think it's a very, interesting space that is going to get very big. I'm also very interested in education that is self-paced and occurs, online or in small groups, but that is student-led kind of, what do they call it? There's a term for when it's student-led, but I like to look at the areas. I look at markets where technology hasn't had a huge impact, and for me, robotics, people doing like manual labor that sucks is one. And that could be very interesting for humanity. And then another one is housing, and even housing plus robotics is kind of interesting to me, like robots building houses. Education, where the education system is super screwed up in the United States. I'd love to see more and more solutions for, we're seeing these ISAs, income sharing agreements, where people agree to share $30,000 worth of their salary over the next 5 years in exchange for you teaching them how to be a programmer or something like that. Or there are websites that'll teach you, very niche websites, one to become a dancer, like steezy.co. We invested in steezy.co. Or brilliant.org, which teaches people math. This idea that they're going to be a vertical site that's just really good at teaching you one thing is fascinating to me, because people go for these giant educations that cost $50,000 a year, and they put themselves into $250,000 in debt, and then their first job out of school is 40 or 50K. So, after taxes, if they're making $40,000 and they're 200 in debt, they got a 5-to-1 ratio of, after-tax income to their debt load. It's just never going to be paid off, right? Even if they lived with their parents and paid off $20,000 a year and lived off the other $20,000, it would take them 10 years to just get to zero. They'd be 31 years old before they were able to even consider having any kind of a life. It's bizarre. I just look at those big broken markets, things that are hard, and just try to think as an investor, God, I can't wait for a founder to take on this one. And Blockables, BLOKABLE, blockable.com is doing modular housing, and I'm super excited about that. Cafe X is doing robotic coffee machines that will make coffee 24 hours a day in places where you can't get a good cup of coffee, give you food, all with like a robotic arm. And, people are like, oh, that seems like overkill. It's like, yeah, it's overkill until you start making like a cold foam, dirty chai, and you're getting espresso from here, and you're getting the chai from the tap, and then you're putting some cold foam on it, right? And then you put a donut on the side or a scone. Okay, so now the robotic arm's done 4 or 5 things, right? You start thinking every year the robotic arm does 1 or 2 more steps, right? Eventually, the robotic arm could be making a hamburger or a pizza or whatever it is, right? So there's coffee is just, I think, the first area where you'll start to see robots be able to prepare a cup of tea or coffee and do it perfectly when a human doesn't.
I love the fact that coffee's the first frontier for robotics to get into. It's like we all require it. It's a human right to have coffee.
Just robots outside of the factory. In a factory, it makes total sense. Like, move this over here, stamp it, move it down the line. It gets a little more complicated when Zoom is trying to make pizza, right? Like, pizza is probably the 50th thing on the list you should do. Coffee is like the first, or the first might be just... Yeah, I think coffee is a pretty good first. Actually.
Coffee is definitely the first. We can agree on that, Jason.
Well, it's the first time I looked at every single robotics company, and only one of them, Cafe X, had done everything soup to nuts. Like there was no human intervention. And then when you look at the pizza, you looked at the burger, there was still a human who had to kind of keep an eye at the robotic arm, and you had to have humans in the store. Once you start putting humans in the store, it's like, well, okay, what's the point?
Right? The human could have done the thing, yeah.
Yeah, then that doesn't mean there won't still be people, just like cars may have replaced horses. Like, horses still get to exist, right? And we just may not have, thousands of horses suffering in the middle of London or Newcastle. Wait, you're in Newcastle?
Correct, yeah, up north.
You by the Spanish city?
What Spanish city?
Spanish city? Is that the Spanish city? Isn't that like outside of Newcastle, there's a thing called Spanish City, which is Spanish City is like an amusement park.
Are you thinking Newcastle, Australia?
No. Hold on a second. Spanish City. 1 second.
Spanish City. If I've lived in the northeast of England for 31 years and there's a Spanish city near me and I've never heard of it, I'm going to be really embarrassed.
Spanish City is a dining and leisure center in Whitley Bay.
Oh my God.
Seaside town in North Tyneside. Is that near you or no?
Whitley Bay is about 10 miles from where I am, but you've just picked, like, what is this? What is Spanish? Is it just a place, like a restaurant or something? Why do you know about this?
Well, because it's in a famous song called "Tunnel of Love" by a band called Dire Straits.
Okay, yeah.
Where Mark Knopfler spent a lot of time at the Spanish City. And he wrote a famous line, like the Spanish City to me when we were kids. You can look it up.
It's just some gaff in Whitley Bay. It's just some place. I'll go next time I go for fish and chips on the seaside. I'll pop into Spanish
And they
City.
actually, by the Spanish City, put the lyrics to that song, Tunnel of Love. You know who Mark Knopfler and Dire Straits are, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, now, when they say Geordie boy, where does a Geordie boy come from?
Okay, so a Geordie is the colloquial term for people from Newcastle. So you have Geordies from Newcastle. That would be Brian Johnson from AC/DC, Geordie. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Knopfler considers himself like a Geordie
then
boy.
you'd
You're a
have,
Geordie boy.
Technically, I'm a smoggy because I'm from Middlesbrough, which is about 40 miles south of here. And my dad would be a Mackham because he's from Sunderland, which is, so you got the three big cities, Newcastle, Middlesbrough, and Sunderland. It's all very tight knit.
Yeah.
What do they call people from? What do they call people from Brooklyn?
What do they call people from Brooklyn? Bridge and tunnel is a derogatory term from anybody who had to take the bridge or tunnel into Manhattan. So that could be Queens or Bronx or New Jersey even.
Okay. Yep.
No, if you're just from Brooklyn, you're from Brooklyn. It kind of stands for itself.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm from Middlesbrough, but you let's come up with something. We need to do a rebrand. Let's get a new brand up.
Well, no, there's a famous song called "Sailing to Philadelphia" that Mark Knopfler wrote, and it's about. It's actually one of the most beautiful songs ever written, and he did the vocals with James Taylor. But it's about the people who drew the Mason-Dixon line, which was Charlie Mason and Jeremiah Dixon, and those were two English surveyors. And I believe Jeremiah Dixon was the Geordie boy, so he was a Geordie boy who did the Mason-Dixon line in America.
Good heritage,
surveyors.
Great heritage, then.
Yeah.
Jason, we made it, man. We made it. Thank you very much.
We did it. Made it to the end.
Been an absolute pleasure.
All right. Let me know when the pod comes out. I'm glad to be at episode 150. And let me know when you plan on leaving the lighthouse.
I used to have, and I promise you, and I can send you a photo to prove it. I used to have right there, that same size, Brooklyn Bridge.
Really?
Promise you.
Why is that?
Why did I change?
You had an affinity? Well, that's a good question, but why the Brooklyn Bridge to start with that?
I liked it. The geometric pattern. So it's taken from the bridge, and you can see the slats running away from you, and you can see all of the wires running up and across. And I just found it. I found it very mesmerizing. I found it very beautiful. And then
have you walked across it yet?
What was that?
Have you walked across the Brooklyn Bridge?
I haven't. No, I went to a stag do. You would call it a bachelor party. We call it a stag do. I went to a stag do in New York last year, and I didn't get to spend any time outside of.
Go ahead and walk over the Brooklyn Bridge. A lot of people do it every day, and you'll be part of history if you go do it. It's a pretty amazing experience to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. I used to ride my bike across the Brooklyn Bridge all the time.
I want to stand in the spot where my photo was my photo. The photo that was there.
Yeah.
I also want to find out. I can't find out where that lighthouse is. So one day a listener will tell me.
No, it's very simple. You take a picture of that lighthouse and you just put it into Google reverse image search. You'll find it.
There we go. That's why you get paid the big bucks.
That's perhaps, yeah. All right, man.
Thank you.
Great to be on the pod.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers now. Bye.